DW Africa Link.
The tension between South Africa and the United States has escalated, with accusations of a racist agenda fueling diplomatic strain. At the G20 meeting, President Cyril Ramaphosa took a different tone, calling for global cooperation despite rising geopolitical divisions. As South Africa pushes back against what it sees as Western bias, the question remains, is this a turning point in US-Africa relations or just another chapter in an already complicated history? Stay tuned. My name is Josie Mahachi. Welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter from Africa.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
South Africa's Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola has told DW that it is obvious the United States is trying to bully the country after US President Donald Trump issued an executive order cutting aid to the African state. The Trump administration cut aid to South Africa amid controversy over a new policy that would allow the government to seize land for use in public projects. The administration also extended refugee status to the Afrikaner group, a white minority grouping. Lamola said he believed racism was behind the move. Lamola's comments come also at a time when South Africa is hosting the G20 summit, in which South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa called for, in quotes, multilateralism and international law to address the escalating tensions. Now, my colleague DW's Dianne Hawker spoke exclusively to South Africa's Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola.
South Africa has taken center stage in international diplomacy this year. It will be hosting the G20 summit in November in Johannesburg, and the country is also amongst those involved in peacekeeping efforts in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, one of the key issues now up for debate is what's going on with South Africa's relations with the United States. This after US President Donald Trump issued an executive order saying that it would cut aid to South Africa over land concerns. Joining me now is South Africa's International Relations and Cooperation Minister, Ronald Lamola. All right, thank you so much for joining us, Minister. You literally fresh off the plane from Addis, where you come from the AU summit. And South Africa will later this year be hosting the main G20 summit. One of the things that South Africa has said is that it really wants to have Africa as a central focus of the G20 summit. How will South Africa go about making sure that Africa is represented and well represented in this G20 summit?
Thank you very much indeed. I've just landed from Addis, and it was an exciting summit of the AU. We're glad that we're able to emerge with the leadership, and we wish them well to take forward the AU, and adopted a number of programs related to Agenda 2063 and the achievement of the SDGs. Indeed, we also briefed the African Union. I briefed the executive of the AU about South Africa's G20 presidency, and also the chairperson of the AU also briefed the AU about the AU's participation in the G20. As you'll be aware, the AU is now a member. And our agenda is aligned in terms of the global financial architecture to be developmental in the African continent. That bulk of the money for development must also come to the continent, because we only receive a migratory amount in terms of development. On climate change, we receive less than 30% when we are the most affected in terms of climate change, and also on the Pact of the Future that was adopted by the United Nations. There is a clear agreement in the continent, and we are looking forward to host all the G20 members here in South Africa this week, particularly the foreign ministers, and the finance track is next week. We will obviously deal with a number of issues affecting the global economy, the global financial architecture, artificial intelligence, but we also see our presidency as very important as a bridge between the global north and the global south to find consensus on achieving the SDGs.
Now, you're talking about being a bridge between the global north and global south. At the moment, we have a situation where America, which is one of the major players in the global north, has said that it won't attend the G20 summit. The secretary there, Marco Rubio, arguing that South Africa is, and I quote, doing some very bad things. Similar comments to being that what was made by President Trump. How is South Africa going to reach out to countries like the US or any others who are a bit reluctant to be involved in the G20 this year?
The G20 agenda was adopted by the G20 members. It's not just South Africa. The theme we talk about, the issues we talk about, was adopted by the G20 Sherpas in December in South Africa, and America participated. I understand it's a change of administration, but they participated in the G20 agenda before the change of administration in December, and it was adopted by all members of the G20, what we prefer to call sufficient consensus. So it was not a unilateral agenda that we've set for the South Africa's G20 presidents. And for that reason, you will have seen majority of the members of the G20 rallying behind the agenda, and also South Africa's agenda is put forward, because it's not our agenda, it's now the agenda of the G20. And they will be participating, they will be here. Even with the US, it's Mr. Rubio himself who said he will not come, but our understanding is that the USA will still be represented at the Sherpa level.
And one of the things that President Cyril Ramaphosa mentioned during his State of the Nation address is that South Africa is going to be doing some field work to other countries across the world, US included, to explain the messaging around the G20. What do you think it is that people are maybe not understanding about the G20? From my understanding, it's focused on stability, equality, and sustainability this time around.
And it's in line with all the previous G20. We have just taken over the agenda from Indonesia, India, and Brazil. It's just a continuity of that agenda. And as I've already said, it's part of what was agreed upon by the Sherpas of the G20, but it's also in line with the UN Pact of the Future and the SDGs. And it's not just a South Africa position. The development, sustainability, inequality, it's an ambition of the SDGs of the UN. And we subscribe to that. You also know our history. To us, the issue of equality, it is very important on the social and economic life of any nation.
Coming to the issue of equality, we've now recently seen a bit of a furore around South Africa's Expropriation Act, particularly with President Donald Trump from the United States issuing an executive order against South Africa, cutting aid, and also welcoming members of the Afrikaner community to US as refugees, as it was stated there. Looking at how this has caused a diplomatic concern from the United States, what are the efforts that South Africa are making to actually resolve this?
Yeah, it is interference with the sovereign state. I mean, what is in the Expropriation Act is in line with universal accepted principles of reform, of redress, which is in our constitution, and it has got sufficient safeguards in terms of the process that is followed to redress the imbalances of the past. It is an open, well-known across the globe that South Africa comes from a history of racial segregation. And the segregation means that in our country as we speak, more than 80% of the land, particularly farmland, is still owned by a white minority. And the safeguards that have been put by the law are not something unique to South Africa. In the US, they have it as eminent domain. In Britain, they have it in various laws. Germany also has an expropriation law. France, there's no country that does not have an expropriation law. Even in China, they have it. And there is sufficient safeguards to deal with this. There's no arbitrary deprivation. So we will engage with the US when the opportunity arises. We'll continue to engage with them, but we'll also engage with the whole world to give context to this reality that every state has got an instrument that enables it to expropriate in the public interest and also for public purpose, to build bridges, to build schools, but also to ensure redress in the public interest.
Well, you mentioned that many states have this. Why do you think South Africa's law has gotten this kind of attention?
It's because of misinformation. As you're aware, to the US, that is the reason, because it's baseless, it's without facts. No one can show you facts that show that Since 1994, since this government took over, there has been arbitrary deprivation of land or property by this government. It has never happened. And it's clear the Constitution provides sufficient safeguards. It will be done in line with the Constitution in terms of how we do the redress. So it is misinformation. I can lay down to that, and maybe, obviously, a racist agenda. Because why would the executive order only target a white minority in South Africa as the people that must be given this refugee status? Because if you want to intervene in any situation where there is persecution, it should not be race-based. And in South Africa, the white Afrikaners in particular, they own the majority of the land. There is no persecution. They live in accordance with the Constitution, unless we're dealing with the issues of nostalgia, of wanting to revert back to apartheid.
You mentioned the executive order, and one other thing that's also mentioned in that executive order is South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. We've also seen the US take some action against the staff at the ICJ, South Africa offering them sort of a safeguard here. To what extent do you think that the ICJ case has played a role in the issuing of that executive order?
Yeah, obviously it is in the executive order. So it means in the back minds of the authorities in Washington, it is an important issue. But we have not received any direct communication from Washington that this is the issue. We want you to either withdraw or do this about the ICJ. But if we do, we will stand our ground, because our basis of the ICJ case is the universally accepted principles in terms of the UN Charter, in terms of the UN positions as an organ of the United Nations, the highest judicial organ of the United Nations. We have followed all those, and we have done it in line with the established convention, the Genocide Convention. So there is no basis whatsoever to malign South Africa. If you want to argue that our case has got no merits, has got no basis, and so forth, the court is there. You can intervene, argue your point, and let the judges of the ICJ decide whether there's a case or there's no case. But we have been to court now 4 times. We have succeeded. And the court said there is plausible genocide. Allowed due process to unfold. That is how the world is built, that the principle of the rule of law must be respected by everyone. And if there's any big lesson the United States has taught to the world, is the rule of law, the Magna Carta principles, universal human rights. These are the shared values between South Africa, the United States, and many countries of the world. Universality of human rights, the principle of sacrosanct of self-determination of any nation, sovereignty. And this is the cause for the Palestinian people, the sovereignty of their country, UN resolution on a 2-state solution. These are all United Nations principles. And we have predicated our case on that basis.
Is America trying to bully South Africa?
Yes, it's obvious. On the basis of economic trade and on the basis of some of the aid that are provided to most of our NGOs and to our government. As you are aware, there is only one program, PEPFAR, that gives us almost 17% of our HIV and AIDS program. But as the South African government, we fund 83% of our own budget in terms of the fiscus. But we run the biggest HIV and AIDS program in the world. So the 17% becomes significant. But we are glad that there is a suspension on the operationalization of that. But we will not be bullied into submissions. We will stand our ground on the basis of principles. But when the US convinces us on any issue, we are available to be engaged and to engage the USA. But to South Africans, I think this is also an opportunity to look at self-sustainability. And this was now a running theme also at the AU, at the African continent, that this could be an opportunity for Africa to look into itself, to build its own self-sustainability, its own value chain, its own ability to manufacture and ensure that the critical minerals that we have in the continent, there is value added at source. And with the African countries and African Union coming in clear support, I think we have got the chance as a continent to look into ourselves, how do we build self-sustainability?
I mean, quite an interesting point you're making there about self-sustainability, because South Africa is a member of the AGOA agreement, along with a lot of other African countries. We are the largest giver and receiver when it comes to the continent. And there is a concern that the current situation could destabilize the ongoing AGOA talks. What do we do about that while simultaneously reaching out to African countries?
Yes, we will reach out to Washington. We will reach out to the African countries, and also themselves, also the African countries reaching out to us. But not only African countries, the European Union, China, and many other countries in the globe, they are also reaching out. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So it means that we have to plan for all scenarios. The first scenario is that AGOA is renewed, which will be happy for everyone. It's our preference. We will engage with the hope that it will happen. But it is not in our hands. Anything can happen. So we have to plan for the worst case scenario. In case it is not renewed, South Africa must be able to say, this is what we are going to do. And these engagements internally and externally will be able to help us to put an alternative plan of that must lead to self-sustainability in South Africa, but also in the African continent. That could be huge. We are, as we have said, we're part of AGOA. It's a mutually beneficial for both the US and ourselves. And we carry the biggest process in terms of the value chain of AGOA. So it is a crucial aspect of our economic life as South Africa. Hence, we will engage. But as I've said, we have to also plan for the worst case scenario, because the engagements is not in our hands. So we will hear how it's concluded, and we will take it from there.
I'd like to move now onto the issue of the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That has been an agenda item both for SADC and the African Union. You've just come back from the AU. Are there any concrete proposals on the table at this point that could see that conflict stabilizing or even being completely stamped out?
Yes, the AU has fully endorsed the SADC and East Africa communique outcome in terms of cessation of hostilities, opening of humanitarian access, then all the warring groups coming together on the table, and also for the M23 to withdraw from all the occupied territories and so forth. You are aware of that communique. And it will be issued by the PSC of the AU in terms of the other details of how to operationalize it. So I think there is clear consensus in the continent in terms of what must happen, in terms of taking the process forward. That will therefore be taken by President Lorenzo of Angola, who is the peace champion, and currently also he has also taken over as the chair of the African Union to engage with all the parties in the conflict, state and non-state actors.
So President Paul Kagame has made some comments in relation to South Africa, and South Africa has made some comments back. And I think that has also become an aspect of this ongoing conflict. What does South Africa make of the threats, in a way, that have come from the president of Rwanda and that diplomatic tension that seems to be growing there?
Yeah, we've been very clear that we believe that the heads of states must engage diplomatically. And we de-escalate that kind of tension and open the line of diplomatic engagements. But obviously, we continue to participate in various multilateral platforms. The SADC and East Africa Summit, the SADC Summit, and the PSC, the Peace and Security Committee of the African Union, where we put our position firmly and clearly in terms of what is the role of a non-state actor, which includes Rwanda, and of all the state actors, obviously in the place, which include Rwanda, the DRC, and that's why the Luanda process is for a DRC and Rwanda to engage. But also the Nairobi process led by former President Uhuru Kenyatta will therefore involve the non-state actors from the DRC, which will obviously include the M23, the FDLR, and all the armed groups in the area, to be involved in a dialogue, peaceful engagement to find a long-lasting, sustainable solution for the DRC, but also for the Great Lakes region, but also for the whole continent, because a conflict in the Great Lakes can be detrimental, can spread up in the whole region. So the Great Lakes is very strategic. It's important that Agenda 2063 of silencing the gun must be achieved in the Great Lakes region.
But then how does that conversation take place when one of the state actors, which is Rwanda, denies that it has any meaningful involvement in that conflict?
There is evidence. UN reports have pointed out that the Rwanda Defense Force supports the M23. There is enough expert reports. So the conversation has to take that into account. So I believe that process through all the PSC, as I've mentioned, the Peace and Security Council is aware of that, and the Secretary General of the UN has raised it. He has said it is not South Africa saying it. The SG of the UN has said this is there. Here are the experts' report. So I believe that through the Luanda process, a solution, peaceful engagement and negotiation can lead to dialogue that must reach a long-lasting peaceful solution in the area. And that engagement cannot happen without Rwanda. It cannot happen without the DRC. And with the one that relates to non-state actors, it must happen involving the M23, the FDLR, and all the parties in the area.
There's been engagements in the past. There's been conferences held. There's been a number of agreements signed over time. What makes this time different?
You cannot get that to resolve a conflict. So this time, it will be different. It will also lead to a peaceful engagement and solution. The conflict has evolved from the last time when we had Sun City in Johannesburg, in South Africa, in 2000, and I think it's 2001. Now there's more groups than there were in 2001. I think now the United Nations count them at more than 100 to maybe estimated to 150. So various armed groups in the area, but as you are aware, currently the dominant one that has taken over Goma and Bukavu, now some aggression is still going on, it's M23. So all the parties in the area, you have to engage them because they have got a role to play to bring peace in the land and in the area, and also go and resolve their own national question, to build national cohesion, to rebuild their own society. We have got our own history of building national and social cohesion, which we believe that even the parties in the DRC have to sit down and deal with the issue of their own national cohesion and resolve it. So there has to be a resolution. In modern history, there has not been military victory.
Dialogue, I think, very important for the African continent, not only if we're looking at the DRC, but even next door, our neighbors, Mozambique. That's one of the things that the president there, Daniel Chapo, has seemingly been saying is going to resolve issues there. We saw months of protest in Mozambique. There seems to be a calm right now. Is South Africa involved in any way at present in trying to mediate the situation amongst the political groups in the Mozambique?
Yeah, Mozambique is a sovereign country. We support them and we support the dialogue that has been initiated by the former president of Mozambique, former President Nyusi, which the current president, upon taking over in his speech, in his address, he said he will take it over. He will engage with all the warring parties, including Mr. Mondlane. And it does seem like he is taking that forward. He is engaging with the parties that are involved in the Mozambican situation. So we are obviously looking at it, and we are encouraging the people of Mozambique to participate in the dialogue, to engage each other, to resolve and find each other in this situation so that we can all go back to resolve the social and economic challenges of Mozambique, unemployment, the socioeconomic realities that the youth is facing. And South Africa stands ready to support that process of socioeconomic resolution of a number of challenges in Mozambique that must help to lead towards resolving the unemployment problem. You are aware that there's a lot of South African companies invested in Mozambique.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate that you made so much time for us today.
That was DW's Dianne Hawker's exclusive discussion with Ronald Lamola, South Africa's foreign minister. That's it for this edition of Africa Link. Remember, you are not just a listener, but a crucial part of our community, and your engagement can shape the direction of our discussions. We value your insights and encourage you to share your thoughts with us. Please remember to follow so you can catch all of the Africa Link podcast episodes. This podcast was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabi. My name is Josie Mahachi. Thanks for listening. Until the next one, it's bye for now.